Fantastic. Nora, over to you.
Awesome. All right, let me just get my notes up. This is so fun. I am super, super happy to be here. I was not expecting that little breakout thing too. So that was really awesome. Cool. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So when Tom asked me to speak at this, I was thinking about like how to format my presentation, and I really know incidents. I really enjoy studying risk. I really enjoy studying incidents because they are just a normal part of work, and they are so related to psychological safety. Someone in my group, I believe it was Rada, talked about like not running from conflict and how important that is in psychological safety. And I think incidents sometimes are inherently conflicts because they're surprises. And it's so important to create psychological safety in those environments because it can carry over to your regular everyday work as well. I also included what I thought the character might look like that we talked about this morning. I wrote this into my slides real quick. So yeah, I had Drew Griffin and Sue Morris in my group, and we decided that we decided what they looked like as well. And they're kind of like this amorphous blob of energy that like can mold to different situations, make you feel heard, active listening and paying attention to others. They also recognize power dynamics. I think that was a really important thing that we spoke about. I think a lot of organizations can put the nice words on their website and use the language that claims they promote psychological safety, but without having it at sort of leadership levels, it's not going to meet the mark. We talked about humor too, and you know, having a little bit of humor to it. And I think that's why Drew said, you know, they're maybe eating a balanced breakfast. It might be at a tea room, but Fruit Loops might also be on the table. And the reason we brought up Fruit Loops is because sometimes you just got to have Fruit Loops for breakfast, and maybe you're not comfortable sharing it with everyone, but this amorphous blob is comfortable sharing that with everybody and making sure it's okay for everyone to admit when they've eaten Fruit Loops. So I'm Nora. I have spent my entire career in risk. And I was reflecting recently, like, how did I end up getting so into risk? And I was really tracing it back to when I was a kid. In my neighborhood, there was this man-made lake. And in the winter, my dad and I would walk over to the lake, and the local firefighters would practice at the lake, rescuing each other as if like they were trapped underwater, under the ice, so that they could practice, or they could be prepared to do that when it came up. And I was so fascinated by how they talked to each other in those moments. And there was an inherent psychological safety to it, right? They were practicing a very stressful, very scary situation before it actually happened. And they were opening up communication with each other in a really beautiful way. And I think that was a lot of how I got interested in chaos engineering too, which is proactively practicing these things, creating turbulent conditions in production, which are bound to happen, and shifting a mindset in our organizations to not what happens if this fails to what happens when this fails, making everyone comfortable with failure, making everyone comfortable with mistakes. And the thing is, these things are not easy to do. I've been studying this stuff for a really long time, and I have been also so excited to create my own company where not only we're building a product that promotes learning from incidents in a psychologically safe way, but I was like, wow, I get to like create the organization I've always wanted to work in too. And it's difficult. It requires work every single day. It's every interaction that you have. And it's been a ton of fun. So prior to starting Jeli, I worked at Slack and Netflix in Jet.com. I was in hardware before that, also studying risk. And at Netflix, I also had the opportunity to write the book on chaos engineering. And then we wrote a follow-up book as well. And then also I keynoted at AWS reInvent about the benefits of chaos engineering and implementing it at Jet.com and Netflix. And then I went on to form a community. I thought we were kind of like cagey about incidents and stuff in the software industry, and I wanted us to not be. The software industry has a historically low tenure between organizations, and I was curious about that, and I was also curious about the fact that in different organizations I had been in, we seemed to have very similar incidents. It wasn't the exact same technical things that were unfolding. It was our attitudes towards some of the technologies and our work with each other. And I thought, wow, it would be really beneficial if we were sharing these things with each other. So I took some time to form a community called Learning from Incidents in Software in 2019. We're a little under 400 people now. We take a lot of care to promote psychological safety in that community too. And I recognize a few people in here from that community. So, hey, but to care about, because people are sharing very sensitive things. And so we have to create psychological safety in that community too, so that we can work through our incidents with each other. And again, it takes work every single day with every single person too. So I'm going to spend a little bit of today giving a primer on human factors and resilience engineering. As Tom mentioned, I am in a master's program focused on human factors and system safety right now. So I'm sure it would be relevant to a lot of folks' interests. It's a cross-industry program. So there's folks from healthcare, there's folks from aviation, there's folks from all sorts of industries, but they're all people that study risk. And study how folks work together and how organizations enable accidents to happen, and also how they react to them afterwards. I'm going to focus primarily on incidents because that's my expertise. It's how do you know how your organization works through the lens of incidents. And then I'm going to talk about some safe spaces to practice psychological safety related to incidents. I like to make my talks engaging. I'm going to try to pay attention to the chat, but yeah, if you want to talk, raise your hand. If anything is of interest, share reaction emojis. I love that I can see folks' faces right now. I think that's one of the hardest parts of remote talks. So thank you so much for the folks that do have their video on. And then I'm going to give you some tangible ways to practice some of this too. So at the end of this talk today, I want you to be able to understand how different approaches to incident analysis can generate more insights and improve performance and psychological safety. I'm going to explain how understanding the social in your complex technical worlds improves the understanding of the technical. I'm going to help you learn how to ask questions in a different way and how that can impact insights clean. And I'm really stoked that we did that exercise this morning with the character, because in my mind too, this character is asking questions in a way that I'm not put in the defensive, that I feel comfortable sharing, and not, having to over explain why a certain thing happened, but instead why it made sense to me at the time. And then assessing appropriate methods for distributing, finding, and sharing learnings with others in your organization. So a little primer on this field, like a lot of what I'm talking about today and a lot of what Jeli's based off of has been a field for over 40 years, much longer than the software industry has existed. And it's been working in high risk and high consequence domains like space operations, healthcare, and aviation. And software has so much to learn from this work. I've noticed we historically kind of like to reinvent the wheel here, but there's so much to take from all this studying. And personally, so I've spent most of my career being an engineer, and now I'm leading my own organization, but studying this stuff and studying incidents when I was an engineer made me a better engineer, because I was able to learn how people did things in the past. And it just makes so much sense, but yet we don't put a lot of time and care into it as an industry yet. It made me better at automating things. It made me better at chaos experiments, made me better at observability. This field has a lot of folks that have made this their life work. And I want to share a quote from Sidney Decker, David Woods, and Richard Cook. They say, resilience is not about reducing errors. Resilience in organizations is about enhancing the positive capabilities of the people in the organizations that allow them to adapt effectively and safely under pressure. And looking at things under pressure, looking at things when there's an incident, sometimes all rules go out the window and you're just trying to do what you can to get the website up to stop the bleeding. And that is really worth studying, because it's those moments that reveal to you your real organization, your organization in practice, not just the organization you think you have. I want you all to put in the chat, how do you feel about this statement? Do you feel like your organization focuses on enhancing capabilities? Do you feel like you focus a lot on reducing errors? Yes, resilience is not robustness. That's a great point, Brian. And I want to share this quote from this book, Still Not Safe. Highly recommend. It's about the healthcare industry. He says, many patient safety programs today are naive transfers of an intervention successful elsewhere, but lacking the contextual understanding to reproduce mechanisms that led to its success in the first place. And I find this with a lot of incident reviews. They're shallow and they need to be more robust, which can inherently be awkward if you don't have psychological safety. Context is so key and is so important. And I'm going to talk to you about that context. So I want to talk a little bit about Jeli, because my entire career led to me making Jeli, and it was just kind of like exploding out of me to the point that I felt like I had to go create this tool. I came up with the idea for Jeli while I was at Netflix, and I was tasked with analyzing burnout. And I was looking at how people were on call and how they were faring in incidents, how teams were faring in incidents. And I realized there was so much richness in how people spoke to each other during incidents. And I started analyzing the Slack data, and I started analyzing how we were talking to each other in incidents. And I realized that incidents were such a rich source for detecting this kind of information. I was able to find hero syndrome. I was able to find oversaturated teams. I was able to find burnout. I was able to start predicting burnout before it came to a head. And the conversations and when people get pulled in and when they're supposed to get pulled in and which teams are getting pulled in and for which systems, like it can help us with a number of things. It can help us with quarterly planning. It can help us with headcount. It can help us recognize maybe when people could use some time off. And so, yeah, we founded Jeli. I founded it in 2019. We're a team of about 21 people now, but we really focus on helping you run a productive incident review through tooling in a way that can help you improve your collaboration and organization in the future. And I want to share a little thing from it. So we really focus on people. And so you can see in this screenshot here, this is a particular incident. This is actually one that happened on my team internally. We use Jeli too, so it gets kind of meta. But you can see who was on call, you can see who was not on call, and you can see who was observing from the incident. So I want you to take some time to, like, what would you glean from this image that might be interesting in terms of psychological safety? This is a particular incident. It shows kind of where people on the world were, who was on call, who was observing, but not necessarily participating in the incident. Yeah, language and time zone issues. Yeah, I wonder what time of day it was for everyone. I see someone in Africa. I see people all throughout the US, almost in every time zone. Yep, not around the clock coverage. Observers versus participants, for sure. I think a big thing for me is that there were 2 people on call, but 8 people were not on call. So we were relying on folks that we didn't totally expect to be there, which tells me we have some knowledge silos for this particular event. So how does psychological safety relate to incidents? So we talked a little bit about, that's a great question, Kurt, too. What was the impact to the planned work for the 8 other people, right? We didn't plan for them to be there. You know, were they up all night? That's really good questions. And it's stuff that we don't pay a lot of attention to. And it is how it relates to incidents. We tend, and I see this in other industries too, we tend to focus technically on what happened and not necessarily on how we coordinated ourselves during the incident. But what's really interesting is how we coordinated ourselves during the incident can lead us to some of the technical things. Looking at those 8 people and what they knew can really help us understand how our systems are actually working and running day to day, and what we're promoting in our organization too. So what can you get out of improving learning from your incidents? You can get a faster detection of problems. You can get quicker recruitment of the right people and understanding who the right people are. Like, wow, you know, we have Tom on call for, sorry, Tom, I'm gonna pick on you. We have Tom on call for Kafka, but he is in every console incident. He hasn't been on the console team for 5 years. But yet we have him on call for Kafka. And so it might look like Tom's workload is totally fine, but Tom might be responding to console incidents every night, and he might not say something, right? He might not volunteer this information. So are we asking Tom about these things? Are we asking Tom about what his experience is? Faster diagnosis of the problem, smoother coordination during incidents, better handling of trade-off decisions, because understanding, we put Tom on call for everything too. Less reliance on your hero engineers. Now, sometimes when I show leaders at organizations this, I get a little bit of pushback. Who has a hero engineer or a hero that they like, you know, rely on in a lot of different incidents? Like, can you, and maybe this is a small group of people. Yeah, of course, everyone should raise their hand. You can think of a few people that you're like, wow, they are just amazing in every incident. And I think some organizations promote this a lot too. Like there's this one person that just seems to know everything. When I was at one organization, it was this particular person, and every time he joined the incident room, everyone would react with the Batman emoji. So we were also inherently like kind of promoting this. We were saying that he was Batman, that no one could attain this level of sophistication of these systems. And he was brilliant. He spent a lot of time working out his knowledge of the system, but we didn't spend a lot of time as an organization pulling that knowledge out of him and disseminating it. It's not his responsibility to disseminate that knowledge. It's actually really, really hard for experts to know what they have expertise in, because it's just so inherently obvious to them after a while. But like, you know, I'll talk to some leaders and they're like, yeah, but this person likes it, and we've given them a bunch of equity and we're paying them a lot. They're not going to leave. And it's like, they're kind of missing the point, because how is everyone else around them feeling? They are trying to be this hero too, right? You know, think of junior engineers in these situations. We're not focusing on disseminating the knowledge, we're focusing on creating these knowledge silos, which actually ends up hurting our businesses, hurts our collaboration, and hurts our psychological safety. It also lead to less burnout for your engineering team. I'm sure this engineer, yes, will tell you that it's fine and they don't mind doing it and they like being the hero, but they're also a human being and they're for sure burning out. It'll lead to greater work satisfaction, more innovative approaches to hard problems, and more collaboration. You're going to hear from more people if you're taking some time to do incident analysis in a correct way. Increased collaboration, lower costs of coordination and incident response, right? Lower costs of getting the right folks in the room, meeting sort of everyone in the company. I worked at one organization where every engineer joined every single incident channel, and it was just untenable. Everyone got excited. It was too much to have an all hands on deck situation. That context switching really hurts, and no one was quite managing that. No one was quite understanding the reverberal impacts of doing something like that. And it can also help you level up your engineering organization. Doing incident analysis and becoming that amorphous blob. Like I was kind of doing that when I was at Slack. I would study incidents and I would interview people after incidents, and my role was to make them feel psychologically safe. We would do one-on-one conversations. I would sometimes just go grab a cup of coffee with them, or we'd take a walk around the building and I'd ask them about the incident. And my goal was to create an environment where they felt comfortable sharing this with me, and then advocate in the larger meeting without being like, this is exactly what Tom told me in this conversation. And the cool part about doing that stuff is I got information about so many systems. I got information about how many things worked. I got information about how Tom's mental model of console was completely different than Stephanie's mental model of console, even though they're on the exact same team and even though they have no idea that their mental models are different. But it's not helpful if only me has all this knowledge. And so I started training other folks in the organization. And that's when you really see engineers leveling up. I had an engineer that had been trying to get promoted from senior to staff for like 5 years. And he didn't get promoted as a result of doing incident analysis. He got promoted because of what he learned through doing incident analysis. And we were starting to promote this learning organization where we disseminated this knowledge. Talking to that person that is Batman, you inherently get to hear how they think if you're asking questions in a certain way. And that's a little bit what I'm going to talk about today too, is how to ask questions in a way that help you elicit that knowledge. Yeah, there's always individual heroes. Yep, it is a really, really good point, and it doesn't happen overnight. There's a few focuses today. So focus 1 is using incidents to develop and disseminate expertise and get more people talking. The first goal is to uncover your team's sources of expertise and share that more broadly. You probably wouldn't go up to the Batman or the engineer in this situation and say, hey, tell me everything you know about this, because it wouldn't be useful or meaningful to do so. But incidents can kind of tell us where to look and what knowledge and expertise is meaningful and important to share with others. Like, for instance, most of the time, they're not explaining their entire thought process. They'll share a dashboard, but are you asking them how they even knew that dashboard existed, how they even thought to go there? Did this remind them of a previous incident that they participated in? And it's relevant to everyone here because incidents tell us where to look. Second focus is eliciting details through cognitive questioning. And I'm going to talk to you about how language matters when you're doing this cognitive questioning. And then I'm going to share a little bit of what we do with the Jeli tool and process, because I was doing this at a lot of organizations and I kind of built the tool I had wished I had in these situations. And a lot of this is based off of a guide that myself and a few experts on my team wrote. It's a fully comprehensive, it's fully free post-incident guide. You don't need to type in your email or anything. We just wanted to kind of give back. And it's providing you with a better understanding of how to get the most out of your incidents. And it shows how to conduct an in-depth investigation. We also have a 101 series if you don't have the time to do an in-depth investigation. And we affectionately call the process the How We Got Here process, or Howie. And it's applicable to companies of different sizes and stages and maturity of incident investigation processes. So I want to ask you, and feel free to put in the chat, how do you know when an incident is occurring at your organization? I was thinking the amorphous blob should be named Howie, Eric. Okay, reporting systems, monitoring, things are on fire, screaming, huh? Someone sends me a Slack. Yeah, I worked in one organization where our head of, it was back when knocks were still a thing, and our head of the knock, if I saw her running down the hallway, I knew that we had an incident. She would be sprinting. Yeah, people get more stressful in conversations, might not know at all. Ultimately, you observe it. You're observing something happening. But I want to ask a harder question. How do you know what actions to take when an incident is occurring? And this is more of what we're going to talk about today. There is inherently psychological safety involved in this, right? Inherently psychological safety in answering this question. So I want to share some of John Allspaw's heuristics. So John Allspaw is in the software industry. He went through the program I mentioned earlier at Lund University, and his thesis, he focused on some incident heuristics, and he came up with 3 of them. So his first heuristic is, what is the first thing you ask yourself in an incident? So I want you to put it in the chat. What do you think the first thing most folks ask themselves in an incident? Like if you're in the hot seat, if you're trying to figure out what happened, what do you first do? What do you first ask yourself? What's the impact? What did I do wrong? Do I have enough info to act? How big is this incident? Who reported it? What are the facts available? Is this actually a problem? Am I going to get fired? Tom, oh. The biggest thing he found is most people ask themselves what changed. If we know something is an incident and we're trying to debug it, we first check if anything changed. If nothing has changed, we then widen the search. We look for any contributors that weren't just about change. And then heuristic 3 was convergence searching, which was going deep into confirming it's not a particular thing. Like, oh, I can roll out the network, I can rule out DNS, I can rule out, this particular system because we were on a code freeze. But I want to go back to this. How do you know what to do when an incident is occurring? How does your organization promote this? And my guess is a lot of organizations don't. So experts use their knowledge base to recognize typicality. That hero engineer has this "I've been here before" phenomenon that they're not quite sure how to explain or where they're pulling it from. They just know. So Gary Klein is a cognitive psychologist who spent so much of his research career studying experts and what makes people experts. I highly recommend checking out his work. And he's the one that said experts use their knowledge base to recognize typicality. And he really studied firefighters. He said, firefighters can go into a fire and notice kind of just by looking at it, whether or not it has the same feel as a previous fire. Being able to look at the roof and understand whether it's okay to step on in a way that's very different from novice firefighters, making fine discriminations and using mental simulation. And if you're not developing a learning organization and developing expertise, you're kind of losing that safety. So Amy Edmondson actually shared this tweet this morning, and I really, really liked it. And I wanted to incorporate it into my talk. Clearly, I'm a big fan of throwing things in that I hear at the last minute. But I really, really enjoyed it. She talks about these 4 aspects of psychological safety and how it relates to performance. There's this comfort zone where people are open and collegial, but they're not challenged and they fail to make major strides. Apathy, people show up work with their hearts and minds elsewhere, choosing self-protection over exertion. There's the anxiety zone where people are reluctant to offer ideas, try new things, or ask for help, which puts the work at risk. And then there's the learning zone, which is the ideal zone. People collaborate and learn in the service of high performance, getting complex and innovative work done. They're challenging themselves, right? I've been in, I think, almost every organization before. When I first started Jeli and we were doing a team building activity and I was trying to think about culture, I asked everyone to reflect on the best team they've ever worked on and the most productive team they've ever worked on. And I was like, ideally, it would be great if they're the same, but everyone had different answers, which is interesting, right? They were different teams in every situation. I think, it's easy to go into the comfort zone, creating like a nice organization that, everyone's kind to each other, but no one's really, or everyone's nice to each other, but no one's really being kind, and no one's, kind of pushing each other and pushing themselves. And this learning organization is hard. It does not come for free. And so I promised I'd talk a little bit about some cognitive interview techniques, like the way you can ask questions to not put people on the defensive and also to get them to tell you a little bit more about their expertise. So these kinds of questions should reveal cues that led people to make observations. So if someone said in the incident chat, wow, or oh my gosh, with no additional context, do you ever just talk to them afterwards and say, hey, what made you say wow? What made you say, oh my gosh? I feel like those are things that very much get talked about in incident reviews because maybe, oh, it should be obvious why they said wow, or oh my gosh. But even just asking them reveals so much. Context for assessments or judgments. So if someone says, this looks really bad, or it must be this particular piece of the system, ask them for context around it. How did you know it was really bad? How did you know it was this particular piece of the system? Have them share their screen and show it to you. And the trick is to use how, not why. Using why kind of makes people feel like they're in trouble in these situations, but using how helps them understand that they were an expert too. Everyone that participated in the incident has some sort of expertise in this situation. And using cognitive interviews, your goal is to make them feel like the expert that they are. You want to make them feel good so that they share this stuff with you because they do have expertise and your job is to unearth it. Rationales for choices or decisions, things that people know, people's states of mind at the time. So someone mentioned time zones earlier. That's a really great thing to look at, like understanding what everyone's time of day was. Was it the middle of the night for anyone? Are they at work the next day, operating under a normal capacity after that? Mental models for how things should work. Factors that led people to take a specific action. Like if someone says, I am going to reset this, I'm going to delete one of these nodes, asking them how they knew that that was the right decision to take at the time. And signals that bring people to ask for help, right? Sometimes I worked at one organization where no one was apprehensive to start an incident channel. They were always apprehensive to invite people. So I'd see like a single human in an incident channel for like 35 minutes before other people came in, and they were typing all their context. And I'm like, why at that 35-minute mark? Like, what happened at that point in time that you said, wow, I really need Tom here? How did you know? Had you worked with Tom in this situation before? Like looking at it, it looks like you and Tom are on different teams, and asking folks about that coordination. It's useful to start with general questions when you're talking to folks. And like I mentioned, sometimes people get nervous during this. So I'll ask them, like, and I know most of us are over Zoom, I'll ask them for like a coffee Zoom, something low stakes. I won't call it an interview on the calendar invite. I'll just say chat about, this incident. And I give them a lot of context into what I'm going to ask them about. But I start with like really easy questions. From your perspective, can you explain what happened in the incident? And that can give you a lot of cues on where to go. It's data in itself, how they think the incident unfolded. And it's your job to also compare that to other people's states. And how did you first get brought into the event? Having them tell you the story of how they got brought into an event, especially if they were not on call. Sometimes the not on call people also just show up. They feel this need and this urge to be in these incidents because they're scared, which is also data. I like to say, what did you mean by this particular thing that you said? And I'll put it up in Slack, to kind of take their defenses down too. I'll ask them to tell me about the ordering of events. I'll say, at one point you said this thing, could you explain what you meant by that? At what point did you discover this mitigator or trigger? Which dashboards were you looking at? Can you show me? And what were you searching for when you were searching those dashboards? How is your comfortability assessing the situation? How long have you been at this organization? How have you seen these things done in the past? Are you frequently on call to respond to things? Is anyone on call for this? How did you feel this incident went from a coordinative capacity? I like to ask them what surprised them. You usually get really interesting ones from that. And how did the shape of this incident response take place? There's also some traps to avoid. And I mentioned language being really important before. Language is super, super important, the how versus why. Avoiding things like root cause. Root cause is just very simplistic on its own, and there's never one single cause for an incident. It's an amalgamation of factors. And by using this language as the person running the incident review or the person talking to someone about an incident, you inherently shape their answer back to you. So you're not going to get as much data back when you use language like this. Human error as cause. Really, really avoid this. Humans are what make the system stay up every day. And also sometimes it happens to fall down, but it wouldn't stay up without the humans in place too. And also counterfactuals. And I find this is one of the hardest things to break people from. When people say, well, this really should have happened, or we should have done this, or the system should have done that. And the reason that this is a problem is that you're talking about an incident that never took place. And you are detracting from what actually happened by saying this. You can talk in the future. They drive me nuts too, Stephanie. Yeah. And it's really hard to break people from them. And it's also a skill as the person running these meetings too and facilitating them to break someone that is talking about counterfactuals in a way that is still psychologically safe and encourages them to continue participating. And if they do say, well, this should have happened statement, try to get them back and say, how did it unfold? Like, we can talk about what should have happened later, but let's right now talk about how it did unfold. And how do you practice promoting this kind of stuff in incidents? So I like using data on the screen to present just the facts. Like if I'm facilitating an incident review or if I'm talking to someone, I want them to know that it's not my opinion on what happened. And your job as a facilitator is not to be the expert in the incident. It's not to tell everyone what happened. Your job is to facilitate a really good discussion. And so I promised I'd show like a little bit of Jeli. This is one of the things we show. So this is an actual incident that took place, right? So we're showing how folks talked to each other in the moment, and we're tagging things, right? We're saying, this is where someone was seeking information. This is where someone was communicating in a way that was beneficial. This is where someone disproved a hypothesis. And so presenting things as just facts rather than, you know, your opinion of the situation can promote psychological safety too. And we also notice that folks seeing themselves on the screen encourages them to participate a little bit more as well. If you want to practice some of this stuff, I highly, highly recommend not doing it with a giant or emotionally charged incident. I like to use low stakes incidents or role playing incidents at first. You know, I was talking about like those firefighters that used to practice at that man-made lake. That was low stakes for them, right? We at Jeli have created a series of like role playing incidents too that we do at different organizations if they want to practice this collaboration with an incident that is not their own and playing characters that are not actual folks in their organization. One of the things you first need to ask yourself as you're going down this journey of improving your incident reviews are, where is your organization at and what are the current business goals, and relating them to them. I find that a lot of people, one of the biggest misses is not thinking of the business goals and not roping leadership into the conversation as well. Leadership has their own sharp end, just like individual contributors do. And the more you kind of include them in these collaborative activities, the more success these programs will have as well. And, you know, out of curiosity, like there's going to be a lot of procedures and stuff that come up, especially if you're in larger organizations. And I'm curious if like you ask anyone in your organization about a procedure they follow, if they know the history of why they're following it. Do new hires know the history of why they're following it? Or is it just playbooks? Someone mentioned playbooks earlier, and playbooks can be helpful, but without context, they can actually end up being a bit harmful as well. So I mentioned Amy Edmondson earlier. She talks a lot about a uniformly high level of confidence where I can say what I'm actually thinking about this thing. And I'm curious, like, you know, how many different answers you get to a particular question as well, because people sharing that their comfortability or sharing those answers in a comfortable setting and a transparent and honest setting can help reveal a lot too. Does it feel safe to speak up at work? And so this is another screenshot from our tool. We also really measure who was participating and how much they were participating. And like, I like to look at that in meetings too. It's important to get different voices heard, but this can also tell you kind of who to talk to in these situations, right? If the participation of one human was very different than others, you know, in terms of word and messages and stuff. And it's not an easy thing to look at either, but it can really, really help you understand who to talk to and how they're talking to each other and who's really driving these conversations, because it actually might surprise you. And you know, if all the groups impacted aren't talking, that's something to really dig into as well. So maybe it impacted a particular piece of the system, but no one from that team is talking. They're all just observing. So talking to everyone that is impacted in some way, even the people that were just observing the situation because they have a take on it too. And using your incidents as a reflection tool to understand how your org is working in practice versus how it's working in theory. Is anyone familiar with the law of requisite variety? Yeah, a little bit. Essentially, it says, you know, the care that you put into creating something should match the importance of what's coming out of it. So, and I like to, you know, relate this to incident reviews. The care of creating an incident or creating all the things that went into the incident should match the importance of that particular incident review as well, regardless of the customer impact, because it had a big employee impact. Informally and practically, it says in order to deal properly with the diversity of problems that the world throws at you, you need to have a repertoire of responses, which is as least as nuanced as the problems you faced. And I really like this screenshot from Requisite Variety.co. You know, when we look at responses here in relation to creating an incident review or relation to creating a new process in your company, I mean spending time like giving your organization understanding of how that incident really unfolded rather than kind of rushing through that review. So I want to go back to Gary Klein. He was someone I spoke about earlier, the cognitive psychologist. And, you know, I shared that thing from Amy Edmondson to psychological safety as it relates to performance improvement. You know, our businesses want to be continuing to perform and improve performance and improve learning. That is a combination of error reduction and also insight generation. And we tend to focus on the error reduction, especially in the software engineering industry, because, you know, we're math nerds. We like to count things, you know, we like to look at systems in this way, and it's harder to look at the insight generation. It's a harder thing to measure. And so folks frequently ignore it, but you're not going to get performance improvement without looking at both. And incident analysis can actually really help fuel this insight generation and help you move towards a more learning organization that you're really trying to achieve. That's funny, Tom. So, you know, what are the components of a strong retrospective process? Every organization has different strengths and limitations and goals for their incident investigation process. So some of these steps might not be applicable towards every organization. And this is stuff that's from the Howie guide that I mentioned earlier. And many folks have constraints on how much time they have. Like not every organization has dedicated investigators. You have another job to do, and you're trying to manage that other job at the same time as you're trying to understand the incident. And some investigators are currently the only one doing investigations, so they end up having to be efficient. And incidents having differing levels of value for investigating too. You know, fundamentally, we truly believe that you can learn from every incident, but realistically, we know that organizations are balancing trade-offs between time spent in development or operations versus time spent learning. It's a real balancing act. Yeah, so what I mean by insight is learning, right? I like to ask folks after reviews that attended the reviews, did you come out of this review learning something that you hadn't learned before? That's an insight, right? Like, oh, I learned that Tom knows a lot about console. So if I'm having a console incident, Tom is my guy for this particular piece of the system. Or I learned that console actually works in this way when I thought it worked in that way. And you really want to ask, Tom is my Batman. Yeah, thanks. Tom, really hyping you up here. And you really do want to ask people that attended this afterwards what they learned. And you want to really get specific with those questions to learn if it's going the right way. And I mentioned here before, identifying sources of data is really important. Look at data that fed into the incident, whether it was from how people spoke during the incident, whether it was from project channels that related to the incident, whether it was from pager duty rotations, all sorts of things can feed into the incident. You need to aggregate all those data sources. And then hearing different perspectives, and I want to share this screen again, hearing different perspectives on an incident review is imperative. And a lot of folks might not even be aware of how much they're talking in certain situations or how much they're relied upon. They might have a feeling, but presenting the facts is really important. And I mentioned this before, but I really do think it's worthy of kind of a slide as well. Incidents are really a catalyst. It's not about the incident. They're a catalyst to understanding how your org is structured in theory versus how it's structured in practice. And this exposed delta, and really understanding this delta, can lead to future psychological safety. It's a catalyst to showing you what your organization is good at versus like what you just versus what you think it's good at. Yeah, work is imagined versus work is done. Absolutely, Jonathan. And you can use your colleagues in previous incidents and releases to inform your processes in the future. Buy a bunch of people into this situation. Don't create processes in a vacuum, like collaborate on them. And my favorite book again, with experience, a person gains the ability to visualize how a situation developed and can imagine how it's going to turn out. Experts can see what is not there. If we're only relying on one expert, we're not building everyone else up. There's something to be said from watching folks, but there's something else to be said from doing it yourself. If you're investing in people's expertise, you're developing a learning organization and you're enhancing psychological safety, which inherently leads to folks being happier and staying at your organizations longer and understanding the systems they created. And I want to share this quote from my friend J. Paul Reed, who also went through the Human Factors program. He says, expertise takes time and space. We need to really create that time and space. It's environmentally based. So I want to share some key takeaways. Taking time to study how an incident happened can really generate insights and therefore improve performance. Understanding the social of an incident improves the understanding of the technical. Asking questions in a different way and sometimes one-on-one can impact the insights gleaned. And using the facts rather than opinions can allow for a more trusting environment in incidents. And then just some future resources. We run a few workshops creating fake incidents. We spent a lot of time on them and they're honestly a lot of fun. There's role playing involved and it's really fun to work with incidents that are not your own. The learningfromincidents.io website, check it out. Some of the folks in this room right now are authors on this website, so shout out to them. And we have the post-incident guide and one of my favorite smaller papers, it's about 2 pages long, it's called The Error of Counting Errors by Robert L. Wares. And yeah, and my email is here too. I love to hear from folks and I genuinely love this topic. So feel free to reach out and we can nerd out together. Thank you.
Yay, thank you so much, Nora. Maybe we could do a nice Zoom applause for Nora. So you can do like spirit fingers because we cannot hear you when you go like this. Yeah, it makes it a little bit more fun. Thank you so much, Nora. Awesome. So we know that you may have, there's a lot to unpack. There's so much awesome information as we shared. We will be, following up with slides. Nora already shared her email address. So if you have additional questions that you would like to ask Nora, we will ask for you to reach out directly to her because we want to also give time for you all to process a lot of this information instead of getting even more new info. So definitely reach out to Nora if you have additional questions. And Stephanie, you're going to tell us what we're going to do next. Thank you again, Nora, so much.
Yeah, thank you, Nora. I'll just dive in. I'm just going to stop the recording. So
great.
I'm stopping now.
Thanks.